15th of September, 1940. Somewhere over Kent, the sky is a dirty, bruised gray torn open by prop wash and the crack of distant guns. Wind hisses along the Spitfire's canopy like sand on glass. Inside the cockpit, everything is vibration and breath fog and the sharp, oily bite of hot metal. The pilot's glove squeaks on the stick as he cranes his neck, searching that thin strip of air behind his tail where death likes to hide. Then he sees it. A dark shape slides down out of the sun, too smooth, too confident. The German fighter does not rush. It angles in like it has all day. A flicker of muzzle flash a line of tracers cutting toward the Spitfire's left wing, and the pilot's stomach turns cold. Clock. He has maybe 10 seconds before the next burst walks into his cockpit, and less than a minute before his fuel gauge stops mattering because the engine stops. Stakes. If he loses power up here, he is not just losing an airplane. He is losing altitude, speed options, and the chance to make it back across the patchwork fields to a runway that is already crowded with wrecks and smoke. He does what every instinct screams. He shoves the nose down. For a heartbeat, it works. The Spitfire bites into the dive gravity, pinning him into the seat as the horizon tilts and the fields rush closer. The German fighter overshoots just slightly, forced to adjust. That tiny mistake is supposed to be the opening, but the Merlin coughs. It is not a dramatic failure. It is worse than that. It is a stutter, a stumble like a man missing a step on a staircase. The propeller keeps turning, but the pull is gone. The engine hesitates, then hesitates again. The pilot's eyes snap to the instruments. His right hand goes tight around the throttle as if he can squeeze power out of it. The sound in the cockpit changes from a steady roar to an ugly, uneven rumble. He has hit the impossible problem that pilots have been whispering about in mess halls and dispersal huts. Bad math. The moment you need the nose down most, the engine decides it cannot eat. The rule against this threat is simple. Never push the stick forward into -G. Roll the aircraft first, then pull, even when every nerve wants to shove straight down. That rule is clean on paper. In the sky with tracers behind you, it feels like asking a drowning man to think about form. Clock. The Merlin gives him 3, maybe 4 seconds of weak power before it dies outright. He forces himself to obey the rule anyway. He rolls the Spitfire hard, turning the world sideways, then pulls through the arc so the airplane still dives, but his body stays pressed into the seat. +G. The kind the Merlin can tolerate. The engine catches, not full strength, not proud, but alive. A rough surge, then steadier. The propeller note tightens like a rope being pulled. Mini payoff. The German fighter is still there, but the window has opened. The pilot gets 2 precious breaths and a thin slice of speed. Enough to slip into a patch of cloud, enough to make the enemy lose him for a moment. And that moment in 1940 is the difference between a shaky landing and a silent crater. If you're watching this and you love the stories where one tiny detail decides who gets to fly home, hit like, subscribe, and come with us. Because the detail that almost killed this Spitfire is not a new gun or a faster wing. It is a fuel line doing exactly what it was designed to do, in the worst possible second. Switch point of view. In another cockpit, the German pilot watches the Spitfire vanish into cloud and bites back a curse. He knows the trick. He has seen it before. British fighters dive, and then strangely they do not stay down. They wobble, they falter, they hesitate like a bird with a broken wing. For an instant, the German fighter believes he has them. Then the Spitfire recovers and slips away, not because it is stronger, but because its pilot resisted the simplest motion in the world. Back on the ground, far from the clouds, there is a different kind of cockpit, a bench, a workshop light. A woman in a coat that smells faintly of oil and chalk dust, leaning over a carburetor diagram with a pencil like a weapon. Beatrice Tilly Shilling does not have tracers behind her. She has something quieter, and in its own way more brutal. A problem that keeps repeating, reported in tired voices, written down in clipped phrases, filed away as if paper can hold panic. Engine cuts out under -G. Enemy breaks away. Pilot forced to roll, loses position. Seconds lost. Seconds are everything. She listens to the story the way a pilot listens to an engine. Not for drama, for pattern, for the part that happens every time. The Merlin is not weak. It is being starved momentarily by the way fuel sloshes and floods when the aircraft goes weightless. A float in the carburetor cannot decide what down is, so the mixture goes wrong at the exact moment it cannot afford to. And her solution, at first glance, looks almost insulting. A simple restrictor, a calibrated opening, a humble 2-inch washer that limits fuel flow just enough to stop the worst of the flooding and keep the engine breathing until better systems arrive. Not magic, not a new airplane, just a small circle of metal that tells the fuel in the middle of chaos you will not rush where you please. Clock in the air, the next interception is always minutes away. On the ground, there is a different countdown, how many more sorties before pilots stop trusting their own aircraft. Stakes, if they cannot dive without losing power, they cannot choose when to fight. They cannot decide when to escape. They become predictable. And predictability in a dogfight is a death sentence. Tilly sets the washer down on the bench. It makes a soft, bright click that barely registers, but in that sound is a promise. Either accept the rule and keep losing seconds, or break the rule with something no one will notice until it saves them. The workshop air is warm compared to the sky, but it carries its own weather, the steady storm of urgency. Papers curl at the corners from too many hands. Tools sit half cleaned, half used, because no one has time to put anything away properly anymore. Outside, you can hear an engine being run up, then cut, then run again like a nervous heart trying to find a rhythm. Tilly Shilling does not look like the kind of person who is supposed to change the outcome of a fight in the air. No leather helmet, no parachute harness. Just sleeves, rolled hair pinned back, and that particular calm you see in people who can hear failure before it happens. She lays the carburetor problem out the way a pilot lays out a map. Not pretty, not poetic, just honest. Under -G, fuel does not behave. It surges, it floods. The float chamber and its little mechanical logic built for a world where down is always down suddenly gets lied to. The mixture goes rich, the engine chokes. The Merlin coughs, then goes quiet for the exact slice of time an enemy needs. And that enemy has learned a habit. German fighters, when pressed, can simply push over into a steep dive, nose down, weightless for a moment, and watch British pursuers falter. It is not a glamorous escape. It is a physics trick, a rule exploit. Clock. If this keeps happening through the next stretch of the battle, the pilots will lose more than airspeed. They will lose trust, and trust is the one thing you cannot order from a factory. Stakes. Every time a pilot hesitates, every time he chooses to roll instead of push because he is afraid of his own engine, the enemy gets a free step away. That means fewer chances to break up attacks, fewer chances to protect the airfields, fewer chances to get home at all. The rule against this threat is simple. The engine must keep breathing no matter which way the pilot throws the nose. So Tilly makes a choice that feels almost rude in its simplicity. She does not redesign the carburetor. She does not ask for a new engine. She does not wait for an elegant solution to be invented and tested and approved while men are already flying today. She inserts a limit, a restrictor, a calibrated opening that throttles the worst of the fuel surge. Not to make the Merlin perfect, just to keep it alive long enough for a pilot to survive the moment. It is the kind of fix that gets judged by people who have never watched a clock bleed out in the sky. Switch point of view. Out on an airfield, A young ground crewman crouches under a Spitfire's nose with a tool roll spread on the grass. The day is loud, but his world is small. Bolts, clamps, the smell of fuel, the faint tremble of a Merlin cooling down. A pilot stands nearby, helmet tucked under one arm, trying to look patient. He is not. His eyes keep lifting to the horizon like the sky might call him back any second. The crewman has been told there is a new part coming. Something from the Royal Aircraft Establishment. A simple piece of metal, the sort of thing you could lose in a pocket. The message that arrives with it is almost comically plain. Fit this. Now. Clock. The next scramble could come in 20 minutes. Or 2. The aircraft cannot be down when the siren starts. The crewman slides the restrictor into place with hands that suddenly feel too big for the job. He tightens, checks, tightens again, as if overcaution can make up for fear. The pilot watches every movement, not because he doubts the crewman, but because he has felt that cough in a dive, and it has followed him into sleep. Mini payoff. The engine runs. Then it runs again. Then, when the pilot yanks the stick through a sharp maneuver during the test, the Merlin does not stumble the way it used to. There is a brief, startling second of silence on the ground. The kind you get when everyone is waiting for the cough that never comes. It is not a miracle. The pilot can still starve the engine if he abuses it. The fix is a bandage, not a cure. But bandages are what you use when you are bleeding now. Back at the bench, Tilly hears the reports coming in, not as applause, but as data. Pilots describe it the way pilots describe weather. Cautiously, with respect. It holds better. It buys time. It is not perfect, but it is something. And something is all you need when you are fighting for seconds. Stakes. Those seconds mean the pursuer stays on the enemy's tail a little longer. They mean a burst of fire happens a little sooner. They mean the German pilot cannot count on that easy nose-down escape to cleanly break contact every time. The rule against this threat is simple. In combat, you cannot hand your enemy a reliable exit. The restrictor does not eliminate the need for discipline. Pilots still learn to roll and pull to treat negative G like a trapdoor. But now, when instinct wins and the nose dips, the engine is less likely to betray them, less likely to turn a choice into a sentence. Switch, point of view. Somewhere above the coastline, a German pilot glances over his shoulder and pushes his nose down, expecting the familiar pause behind him. He expects the British fighter to cough, to drift, to fall away just enough for escape. Instead, the Spitfire stays with him, not perfectly, but close enough to be dangerous. You can feel the surprise even through the distance, even through the wind and the roar. A tiny tilt of wings, a twitch of correction. A man realizing his old trick is not a law of nature anymore. It is a gamble. Clock. One more turn, one more dive, one more second. That is all it takes for the advantage to swap hands. On the ground, Tilly's little washer sits inside a machine that is about to be torn through the sky again. No ceremony, no speeches, just a small circle doing its quiet work. And the battle does not pause to admire it, because the next problem is already waiting. The enemy adapts, pilots push harder, and the temporary fix starts to show its edges. The cliffhanger is simple. If this washer can steal back the nose-down escape today, what happens when both sides change the rules tomorrow? Late September 1940. Somewhere along the south coast, dawn arrives thin and reluctant, a pale strip of light under low cloud. The airfield is mud and cigarette smoke and the hard clack of boots on planks. A Spitfire sits with its nose pointed into the wind like it is listening. Ground crew move around it with the quiet speed of people who know the siren can steal the next minute. A pilot climbs into the cockpit and pauses before pulling the straps tight. He does not look heroic. He looks tired. The skin around his eyes is bruised from too little sleep. His hand rests on the instrument panel for a second, almost like he is steadying himself on the edge of a ledge, because he remembers the cough, not the sound exactly. The feeling, that instant when your stomach floats and the engine forgets you exist. Clock. The controller's voice is already in his headset. A raid has been plotted. He has minutes, not hours, before the wheels leave the ground and the math of altitude begins. Stakes. If he misjudges the next dive, he will not just lose the chase. He will lose the fight. And if the fight breaks wrong today, it is the airfield, the town behind it, the people on the roads who pay the price. He starts the Merlin. The engine catches and settles into that familiar, uneven thunder that becomes a kind of comfort. He taxis out, joins the other aircraft, and lifts into the gray. Up there, the world is a different country. Cloud is not soft. It is a wall that hides threats and muffles sound. Sunlight comes through in bright wounds. They find the German fighters above and ahead, dark dots turning into shapes, then into intent. The first pass is quick, brutal, confusing. No one has the luxury of a clean duel. It is a rolling mess of angles, flashes, and sudden fear. A German fighter breaks away doing what German fighters have been doing for weeks. A push, nose down. A steep drop that used to be a door you could not follow without your engine betraying you. The British pilot feels the old panic rise. The rule against this threat is simple. Do not let instinct shove you into weightlessness. Roll first, then pull. But rules are easier when you trust the machine under you. He follows the German fighter. He rolls hard, then pulls down after him. The Spitfire screams into the dive. His vision narrows at the edges. The straps bite his shoulders, and the Merlin stays alive. Not smooth, not perfect. But it does not cough the way it used to. Mini payoff. For the first time in what feels like forever, the distance does not grow. The enemy does not simply fall away like a stone. The British pilot holds the tail long enough to force the German to keep turning, to keep spending speed and altitude. Clock. In the dive, seconds come in sharp slices. He has 5 seconds before the ground becomes a threat, and maybe 3 before the German fighter changes its mind and snaps back into a climb. Switch point of view. In the German cockpit, the pilot expects the familiar advantage. He expects the British engine to stumble, expects the pursuer to drift just out of range. He has used that expectation like a tool. Instead, he hears the British fighter still there. The sound is not clear, not close enough to be comforting, but it is present in the air behind him like a shadow that refuses to detach. He glances just once, sees the Spitfire still committed, still in position. The surprise is quick, then anger. His safe exit has turned into a contested space. Stakes now he must choose. Keep diving and risk losing too much altitude, or pull up and risk the British guns in the moment of transition. He pulls. Hard. The aircraft shudders as it climbs. The Spitfire follows not because it is faster, but because it did not lose those precious heartbeats to a fuel surge. Back on the airfield later, the pilot climbs out with hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. He says nothing dramatic. He just looks at the ground crew and nods once, as if to say that thing you installed, it mattered. And that is how change spreads in wartime. Not through speeches, through nods. Switch point of view. In an office that smells of damp paper, a clerk marks a report with a pencil and slides it into a stack. Another report describes the same thing: improved response in abrupt maneuvers, reduced cutouts, increased pilot confidence. The words are restrained, but the message is loud. Somewhere else, Tilly Shilling hears the same thing filtered through the chain of command. The washer is working. It is not a cure, but it is buying the battle something it cannot afford to lose. Time. A single technical detail is enough to understand why. The restrictor simply limits how fast fuel can rush through the carburetor during that moment of weightlessness, so the engine is less likely to choke on an overly rich mixture. It does not change the laws of physics. It changes how sharply physics can hurt you. Records differ on exactly how quickly the restrictors reached every squadron, but the outcome is consistent. Pilots report fewer engine stumbles, and the enemy's nose-down escape stops being a certainty. Clock. But the clock never stops. The next problem is already ticking. If the enemy cannot rely on the pushover anymore, they will find another move. They always do. Stakes. And on the British side, there is a different fear. What if the washer becomes a crutch? What if pilots start to trust it too much? Push harder, dive deeper, and meet the ground before they meet the enemy. The rule against this threat is simple. A fix is not permission. It is a lifeline. You hold it, but you do not lean your full weight on it. So training adapts. Briefings change. Pilots are told the washer buys a moment, not an excuse. Roll first when you can. Keep your head. Do not chase into the earth. And in the background, the real long-term solution keeps moving. Better carburation, pressure systems, designs that do not care whether the aircraft is upright or inverted, but those take time. Testing, production, approval. The war does not wait for any of that. The washer is the bridge across a gap that has been trying to swallow men whole. The cliffhanger is waiting in the next scramble. If a tiny restrictor can steal back a few seconds, how many seconds can the enemy steal back when they discover the trick is gone? October 1940. Somewhere in southern England. Rain comes in sheets that turn the dispersal area into a shallow lake. The men move between huts with collars up and shoulders hunched, boots sinking, breath steaming. A pilot stands under the edge of a tin awning and listens to the weather hammering the roof. Every so often, the distant siren tests its voice, and every head turns at once like a flock of birds. Inside the briefing room, the air is damp wool and stale tea. A map is pinned to the wall. Not the clean kind you see in peacetime manuals, but one scarred by fingerprints and pencil marks, the coastline traced and retraced until it looks like a wound. The squadron leader speaks quietly because he has learned that shouting does not make men braver. It just makes them deaf. He points to a simple note on the board, written in block letters. Roll, then pull. The rule against this threat is simple. -G is the trap. If you dive the right way, even when your body begs for the wrong one. He does not mention the washer by name. Not because it is secret, but because it is not the point. The point is that the washer buys you a moment, and discipline decides what you do with that moment. Clock, once you see the enemy, you have seconds to choose your move. Once you choose, you are committed until the aircraft either answers you or betrays you. Stakes. A moment of sloppy instinct can cost your wingman. It can cost your formation. It can cost the aircraft you are trying to protect beneath you. Switch point of view. In the back of the room, a new pilot listens with his jaw clenched. He has not been in combat long enough to carry ghosts, but he has heard the stories. He knows the cough. He knows that some men have already died because the engine faltered in the wrong second. He also knows another truth. The roll and pull method costs you something. It costs time. If you roll first, you change your line of sight. You lose the clean, straight plunge. You sometimes lose the perfect shot. In a turning fight, that half second can be the difference between seeing the enemy fill your sight and watching him slip away. The washer was supposed to help, and it does, but it does not erase the trade. The squadron leader knows it too. He does not pretend otherwise. He just sets the reality on the table. Mini payoff. With the restrictor fitted, he says the engine is less likely to cut. That means you can hold the chase longer. But don't be stupid. Don't shove the nose and trust a piece of metal with your life. The room absorbs that line in silence. Outside, the siren finally commits. A rising wail that cuts through rain and roof and skin. Men move at once, chairs scraping, boots thudding, helmets grabbed, parachute straps swung into place. Clock from the moment the siren starts, you have minutes to be airborne, sometimes less. The enemy will not circle politely while you finish your tea. On the runway, engines cough into life, then roar. Spitfires and Hurricanes taxi through puddles, spray fanning behind their wheels. The rain blurs everything, turning the world into smeared gray. They climb into cloud and immediately lose the ground. The aircraft becomes its own universe again. A shaking shell with a heartbeat at the nose. They intercept above the coast. German fighters appear in gaps of cloud like knives being drawn from sleeves. The fight is short, violent, and hard to describe because it happens too fast for language. A German fighter breaks away and dives. It is almost reflexive now, the old nose-down escape trying to reassert itself. The British pilot in our story feels that spike of instinct, the urge to shove the stick forward and follow straight down the simplest line. The rule against this threat is simple. When fear asks for the easy motion, you pay it with discipline. He rolls, he pulls, his vision tightens. The aircraft screams. The Merlin stays on. The washer does its job. It buys that fraction of stability when fuel would otherwise surge. Mini payoff. He stays close enough to force the German pilot into a harder turn. Not a kill, not a triumph anyone will write on a board. Just a small victory. The enemy does not get away clean. Stakes. That matters because every German fighter that has to fight its way out burns fuel, burns altitude, burns confidence. It returns home with less to spare. It is one more aircraft that is late to the next attack. Switch. Point of view. In the German cockpit, the pilot feels something unsettling. The British fighter is not fading. The old trick is no longer a guarantee. The escape has become work. So he adapts. He uses cloud. He uses a sudden climb. He uses a rolling dive that forces the British pilot to constantly change his G-load. He is looking for the edge of the washer's promise, because every fix has an edge. Clock. The fight becomes a test of endurance. How long can the British pilot keep positive G without blacking out? How long can he keep the engine fed without pushing into the trap? The pilot's arms burn. The aircraft shudders. The clouds smear past. For a moment, the German fighter disappears, then reappears lower, trying to lure him down. He almost follows, almost shoves the nose. The ground flickers in his peripheral vision, closer than it should be. Stakes. If he chases too deep, he trades the enemy for the earth. If he breaks off too early, he hands the enemy his exit again. He chooses to break, to live, to climb back into safer air and rejoin his wingman. It feels like failure in the stomach, but it is survival in the logbook. Back on the ground later, the aircraft taxis in rainwater streaming off its wings. The ground crewman climbs up and opens the panel, checks the installation like he is checking a stitch. He wipes a finger along the metal, sees the faint sheen of fuel residue and nods. The washer is still there, still small, still silent. The cliffhanger is the question every wartime fix creates. How long can you hold an advantage made of something so simple before the enemy finds a way around it? October 1940, somewhere west of London. The building looks ordinary from the outside, the kind of place you could walk past and never guess it is part of a war. But inside, the corridors carry a constant hum. Telephones ring, stop, ring again. Boots scrape, paper shuffles like dry leaves. A radio in a side room murmurs with clipped voices and weather reports that feel like prayers. Tilly Shilling moves through it without hurry, and that is what makes people notice her. Everyone else is running, chasing the next crisis like it is always one step ahead. She walks like she has already decided which crisis matters. She stops at a desk where a stack of pilot notes waits. The handwriting changes from page to page. Some are careful, some furious, some shaky. The language is spare, but every line carries weight. Engine cut on pushover. Better with restrictor fitted. Still stumbles if you force it. Saved me in the dive. Nearly lost it in the cloud. She reads them the way you read a wound. Not just where it hurts, but how it happened. Clock, the Battle of Britain has shifted in intensity, but the days are still counted in sorties. Every morning is a new test. Every afternoon is a new exhaustion. The washer is in the field now, and that means it is no longer an idea. It is a promise that has to hold up under stress. Stakes. If the fix fails in a critical moment, it does not just fail one pilot. It breaks faith across a squadron. Men start to hesitate again, start to fly conservative, start to hand the enemy space they cannot spare. The rule against this threat is simple. A temporary fix must be treated like a weapon. It has to be monitored, maintained, and understood, or it turns into a rumor. Switch point of view. A test pilot stands on a wet tarmac and looks up at a low ceiling of cloud. He is not going into combat today. He is going into the problem itself. A mechanic tightens a panel. Someone hands him a clipboard with a checklist, and the paper trembles in the wind. He takes off and climbs into gray, then puts the aircraft into a series of maneuvers that would make a combat pilot flinch. Quick pushovers, abrupt rolls, violent transitions. He is trying to make the Merlin cough on purpose. This is the part of wartime engineering people never film. The quiet cruelty of repeating danger until it becomes predictable. A single technical detail is all you need to see the line they are walking. The restrictor reduces the worst surge by limiting flow, but if you demand too much negative G-fuel, behavior still shifts and the mixture can still go wrong. The washer is not a shield. It is a delay, mini payoff. The test pilot reports that the engine holds better through brief pushovers. Not perfect, but improved. The coughing is rarer. That means the fix is real, not luck. Back in the office, Tilly hears the result without celebration. She just adds it to the pile of facts she is building like stones in a wall. Clock. There is a different countdown here. How fast can they fit these restrictors into enough aircraft before the next wave of fighting demands it? How fast can they spread the instruction that goes with it, so pilots do not treat it as permission to ignore the rule? Stakes, because the enemy is changing too. They are not going to keep offering the same escape if it stops working. They will twist the fight into new shapes that stress the British pilots in different ways. The rule against this threat is simple. Never assume your opponent will keep playing the same hand. Tilly takes a pencil and writes a note that will be repeated in briefings and hangars until it becomes instinct. Restrictor fitted does not equal immunity. She knows what happens when men believe in a magic part. They push farther than they should. They chase lower than they should. They turn a safety margin into a debt. Switch point of view. Back at the airfield, a ground crewman finishes fitting another restrictor. He has done it enough now that his hands know the steps. He wipes his palms on his trousers, then looks up as a pilot approaches. The pilot's face is set in that specific expression of someone trying not to admit fear. He asks one question quietly, like he is asking for luck. Will it hold? The crewman does not promise. He just says what he knows. It will help. That is honest. That is all he can give. Mini payoff. The pilot nods, straps in, and takes off with a little less dread than last week. Not brave, not fearless. just a fraction steadier. Somewhere above, the fight begins again. Another raid, another interception, another swirl of aircraft in cloud and sunlight. A German fighter breaks away and drops its nose. The British pilot follows, rolls, pulls, keeps positive G. The Merlin stays alive. The distance holds. And then, just when it feels like the story is settling into a pattern, the German pilot does something different. Not a simple pushover. A rolling dive that flips the axis, a sudden half climb, a slashing turn that forces the British pilot to choose between staying with him and staying safe. Clock. In that split second, the British pilot has to decide: chase and risk the trap, or brake and keep the aircraft intact for the next fight. Stakes. If he makes the wrong choice, the washer will not save him. The earth will not forgive him. And the enemy will learn exactly where the edge of the fix is. The rule against this threat is simple. When a tool gives you time, you spend it on judgment, not on pride. The cliffhanger hangs in the air with him. The washer changed the math for one escape. Now the enemy is trying to invent a new one, and the next seconds will decide who adapts first. November 1940. Somewhere over, the channel approaches. The air up here tastes thin, even through a mask. The sun is sharp above the cloud layer, bright enough to hurt, but below it is a different world. A gray sea of vapor with occasional holes that show real sea cold and dark and waiting. A Spitfire patrols along the edge of that cloud like a man walking the lip of a cliff. The pilot keeps scanning not just for aircraft, but for shape changes in the cloud itself. Because sometimes you do not see the enemy. You see the way the sky reacts to him. A flicker, a shadow, then a sudden clean break of wings as a German fighter slices through sunlight and drops away. Clock: he has maybe 8 seconds before the enemy is out of his favorable range and into cloud, where angle and surprise belong to the other side. Stakes. If he loses contact, the German fighter returns to the bombers or to a new ambush. If he chases wrong, he trades the enemy for the sea. The rule against this threat is simple. Never let the enemy choose the axis of escape. If he dives, you decide whether you follow, and how. The pilot's hand tightens. He knows the washer is fitted. He knows it can help. He also knows the edge cases, the moments where a fix becomes a temptation. The German fighter pushes down into a steep drop, then twists into a rolling dive, trying to pull the British pilot into that half second of confusion where instinct takes over. The Spitfire pilot rolls to follow, trying to keep positive G, trying to keep the Merlin fed the safe way. For a few seconds, it works. The aircraft holds. The engine stays alive. Then the cloud swallows them. Sound changes inside cloud. The engine noise feels muffled, as if the air itself is thicker. The world becomes all instrument, needle, and gut instinct. The pilot cannot see the horizon. He can barely see his own wingtip. Clock. 3 seconds, without visual reference, becomes 5, then 7. Your inner ear lies. Your hands want to correct for motion that is not real. Stakes. If he loses control in cloud, he does not need an enemy to kill him. The aircraft can do it alone. Switch. Point of view. In the German cockpit, the pilot is doing the same math. He has learned the British no longer cough and drift away in the easy pushover. So he makes the pursuit expensive. He uses cloud as a wall. He uses a rolling dive to force the British pilot into constant corrections. He is not just escaping, he is testing, looking for the moment the British pilot makes a mistake. The British pilot feels his aircraft buffet, a tremor through the stick. He is on the edge of the cloud's deception, and he is on the edge of the washer's promise. A single technical detail matters here. The restrictor can reduce flooding during abrupt negative G, but if the pilot briefly unloads the aircraft while correcting in cloud even momentarily, fuel behavior can still shift. Not enough to kill the engine every time, but enough to produce that ugly hiccup when you least want distraction. The Merlin gives a small stumble, not a full cough, not a death, just a reminder. Stakes, the reminder, costs focus. Focus is what keeps you alive when you cannot see. The pilot forces his breathing slow. He eases the pressure, then reapplies it smoothly, keeping the aircraft loaded, keeping positive G, giving the engine what it needs. Mini payoff. The stumble does not become a cutout. The Merlin steadies. The pilot keeps control through the cloud long enough to break out into sunlight again. When he emerges, the world snaps back into clarity, and the German fighter is not where he expected. Switch point of view. The German pilot has reversed. He has used cloud to flip the fight, coming back up at an angle, hoping to catch the British pilot the moment he exits, disoriented, slow, vulnerable. The Spitfire pilot sees the glint at the last second. He jerks the aircraft into a hard turn, the seat straps biting. Tracers pass behind him like someone tearing cloth. Clock, 2 seconds. That is all he has before the next burst could stitch him. The rule against this threat is simple. Do not panic into the trap. You move with intent, not with fear. He rolls and pulls again, diving the disciplined way, trying to keep the engine in the safe zone. The Merlin holds. The washer helps. The aircraft answers. Mini payoff. He survives the ambush. Not by winning, not by outshooting the enemy, but by keeping the machine alive through a moment designed to make it fail. Back at base, the debrief is quiet. The pilot describes the stumble in cloud. He does not dramatize it. He just says it happened, and that it nearly pulled his attention away at the wrong time. The intelligence officer writes it down. The engineering liaison reads it later. The story makes its way back to Tilly as another data point. Clock. The fix is still buying time, but now the enemy is trying to spend that time against you, forcing you into situations where even a small hiccup becomes deadly. Stakes. If the enemy can create enough edge cases, enough cloud fights and rolling dives and disorienting reversals, the washer stops feeling like an advantage and starts feeling like a thin rope. The rule against this threat is simple. The smallest details keep you alive, but they do not replace skill. They sharpen it. The cliffhanger is waiting in the next patrol. The enemy has learned that the nose-down escape is no longer free. So now he is charging interest in cloud and confusion in tiny stumbles that could become graves. Winter 1000, 940 into early 1000. 941, somewhere in England. Cold changes everything. Metal contracts. Oil thickens. Fingers lose feeling faster than courage. On the line, ground crew work with breath freezing into their scarves, tools biting their palms. A Merlin starts reluctantly, then settles into a rough idle like it is complaining about being awake. The washer is still inside some of these aircraft, still doing its small job, but the war is not standing still. Engineers are moving. Manufacturers are moving. The enemy is moving. And pilots keep flying. Clock. Every day the weather allows sorties go up. Every day the weather denies anxiety builds. The clock is not just hours. It is seasons. A battle won in summer can be lost in winter if you fall behind. Stakes. The washer bought a moment, but moments expire. If the next solution does not arrive in time, the enemy finds a new weakness, and the same pilots are back to fighting their own machines. The rule against this threat is simple. A stopgap is not an endpoint. You use it to reach the next bridge. Switch point of view. In a different office, with different paperwork, another engineer runs a finger along a new diagram. Not a restrictor this time. A system that does not care which way gravity points. Pressure carburation, fuel delivery that can stay stable in abrupt maneuvers, not because you limited the surge, but because you changed the mechanism that creates the surge. This is the future pressing in. It does not erase the washer. It makes it obsolete. And that is not an insult. It is the goal. A single technical detail marks the difference. The restrictor works by limiting flow through a carburetor designed for normal gravity. Pressure systems can maintain mixture under more extreme conditions because the fuel is pushed and metered with less reliance on a float bowl's sense of up and down. It is a quieter kind of revolution, but quieter does not mean quick. Clock. New systems need time to test, to produce, to distribute, to fit. Time the war still charges for, so the washer stays. It remains a lifeline for aircraft still using earlier setups, a small circle of metal guarding against a very specific failure, while the bigger fix crawls toward the front line. Stakes. Meanwhile, pilots are still facing edge cases. Cloud reversals, rolling dives, sudden unloads in hard maneuvers. The washer helps, but it cannot protect against everything the sky and the enemy can invent. Switch point of view. A pilot in early 1941 sits in a dispersal hut, hands wrapped around a mug that has long gone cold. Across from him, another pilot rubs his eyes and speaks in a low voice about a fight over the sea where the engine stumbled at the worst time and only discipline kept him alive. They do not talk about engineering. They talk about habits. Roll first. Keep it loaded. Don't chase into the earth. Because those habits are still the real armor. Mini payoff. The washer and the discipline together have changed the way the enemy breaks away. The nose-down escape is no longer the free door it once was. German pilots have to work harder, think harder, rely on different tactics. That is a subtle advantage, but subtle advantages add up. Records differ on how often German pilots deliberately used the pushover as a standard escape compared to other maneuvers, but the outcome is consistent. British pilots report that abrupt dives no longer reliably shake them loose when the restrictor is fitted and discipline is maintained. Clock. The battle rhythm is changing, not ending but shifting. The crisis pressure of 1,940 eases in some places and returns in others. The war moves on. Stakes. And the washer risks being forgotten in the shadow of bigger machines, bigger campaigns, bigger headlines. But forgetting it would be missing the point, because the washer is a lesson in how wars are often won. Not by one grand invention, but by a small detail that arrives at the right time and keeps people alive long enough for the next invention to arrive. The rule against this threat is simple. When survival depends on a chain of solutions, you cannot dismiss the smallest link. Switch point of view. Tilly Shilling stands again at a bench, older by months of pressure, looking at the small ring that caused so much argument and saved so many seconds. There is no ceremony, just a quiet satisfaction that her fix did what it was supposed to do. It bought time, and in war, buying time is sometimes the same as buying lives. Clock. The next phase of the conflict is already ticking toward new theaters, new aircraft, new enemies, new problems that will demand new washers, new quiet solutions. Stakes. The danger now is complacency, the belief that because one problem was patched, the machine is safe. The belief that the enemy will not find another seam. The rule against this threat is simple. The war always finds the seam. Your job is to stitch faster than it can rip. The cliffhanger is not in the sky this time. It is in the mind. If a small circle of metal could reshape a moment in 1,940, what other invisible details are sitting on benches right now waiting to decide who gets to come home? Early 1,940. 941. Somewhere on a rain-washed airfield in England. It is a small thing, the kind of object that does not look like history. A ring of metal. A simple opening carefully measured. It fits in a palm. It could disappear in a pocket. And yet pilots talk about it like it has teeth. They do not always call it the RAE restrictor. They do not always call it a limiter. They give it a nickname because nicknames are how airmen make fear manageable. Miss Shilling's Orifice. There is a bitter humor to it, a way of laughing at the fact that a life can depend on something so plain. But the humor carries respect too, because you do not joke about a thing that failed you. You joke about the thing that saved you. Clock. The moment you push into a dive is still measured in seconds. The enemy is still measured in distance. The ground is still measured in mercy. Stakes. The washer does not just change one maneuver. It changes a pilot's confidence. And confidence changes decisions. Decisions change who returns. The rule against this threat is simple. You can survive a flawed machine if you know its flaw, and you build your habits around it. Switch point of view. In the hangar, a ground crew chief explains the part to a new mechanic. He does not lecture. He points. He shows. He makes the mechanic feel the weight and the shape. This goes here. You seat it right. You do not damage it. You check it after. He says it like he is teaching someone how to tie a knot that will hold a man over a cliff. A single technical detail is enough to make the stakes real. The restrictor limits fuel flow to prevent the carburetor from flooding during abrupt negative G, reducing the chance the engine will choke. It is a controlled bottleneck designed to keep the mixture from going wildly rich in that one dangerous moment. That is all. That is the whole trick. And it is enough. Mini payoff. The mechanic installs it cleanly on the first try. The crew chief nods. One more aircraft is a little less likely to betray its pilot. Outside, pilots walk past, with collars up, helmets under arms. One of them pauses and looks at the open, cowling at the hands moving inside. He does not interrupt. He just watches like a man watching someone load a lifeboat. Clock. In an hour, he may be in cloud again. In 2, he may be in a fight where he has to choose between instinct and discipline. Stakes, he is not thinking about victory. He is thinking about the moment where the engine used to cough. He is thinking about whether it will cough today. Switch point of view. In a briefing hut, another pilot tells a story, low voice, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. He describes a German fighter trying the old pushover and discovering the British still on his tail. He describes the surprise, the sudden turn, the way the fight shifted into a harder spiral. He does not brag. He just says, "It held." 2 words. But in those 2 words is an entire chain of work. A bench, a drill, a washer, a mechanic's hands, a pilot's discipline. Records differ on whether every pilot loved the restrictor or whether some complained it affected performance in other ways. But the outcome is consistent. It reduced the cutouts that had been costing pilots seconds and opportunities, and it bought time until improved systems arrived. The rule against this threat is simple. In wartime, you do not wait for perfect. You install better, you fly with better, you survive with better. Switch point of view. Back at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, Tilly Shilling hears the nickname, probably from someone trying not to smile. She does not chase applause. She does not demand her name be spoken correctly. She simply asks the questions she always asks. Is it working? Where does it fail? How fast can we improve? Clock. This is the engineer's clock. Not 10 seconds to live, but weeks to iterate, months to spread, a different countdown that still ends in life or death. Stakes. Because every fix that works creates new behavior, new tactics, new edge cases. The enemy is not frozen in place. He is watching, learning. The rule against this threat is simple. If you solve one problem and stop the war, will create another. So the restrictor becomes part of a larger story. Not the end, but a hinge. A moment where a small detail tipped the balance from helpless to contested. In the air, British pilots keep rolling instead of shoving because discipline is still the true guardrail. But when fear wins, when instinct jerks the nose, the engine is less likely to die. That is what the washer gives them. A sliver of forgiveness. Mini payoff. And forgiveness in combat is rare. It is usually paid for in metal sweat and the quiet intelligence of people who never fire a gun. The cliffhanger now shifts from the sky to the memory. The washer is becoming legend. Legends get simplified. They turn messy truth into a clean story. If you can change the course of a fight with a piece of metal you can lose in your pocket, what other small truths are being overlooked because they are not dramatic enough to notice? Spring 1941. Somewhere over southern England, the season changes the light first. The air loses its winter bite, but it keeps the same danger. The sun sits higher and longer, turning cloud edges, bright turning aircraft into silhouettes you can spot from miles away. If you are looking in the right direction at the right second. A Spitfire patrol cruises above scattered cloud, the Merlin's note steady the cockpit warm enough that the pilot's fingers can feel the controls without pain. That should feel like relief. It does not, because comfort makes you careless, and carelessness gets punished quickly. Clock. The next contact can be in 10 minutes or 10 seconds. The sky never gives you warning in the amount you want. Stakes. If you lose position in the first turn, you spend the rest of the fight trying to buy it back. And sometimes, you never do. The rule against this threat is simple. In a dogfight, you do not chase the enemy's move. You anticipate the move he wants you to make. The German fighter appears out of sun and drops into the fight with a confidence that feels familiar. The pilot sees the angle, sees the intent, sees the beginning of a maneuver he has learned to fear. The pushover is coming, but it does not come the way it used to. Instead of a clean nose-down escape, the German pilot blends it into a rolling drop, then snaps into a shallow climb, then pushes again, a stuttering rhythm designed to make the British pilot unload the aircraft for a heartbeat, to make him create his own negative G without realizing. The Spitfire pilot feels the trap, but the trap is not just physics now. It is psychology. It is the enemy forcing you to make a mistake with your own hands. Clock 4 seconds to decide whether to stay in the chase. And one heartbeat of inattention is all the trap needs. Stakes lose the engine for even a moment and you lose the line. Lose the line and the enemy turns it into a shot. The rule against this threat is simple. When the enemy tries to make you weightless, you keep the aircraft loaded. You keep the engine fed. You keep your mind calm. He rolls and pulls, holds positive G, keeps pressure on the seat, keeps the horizon from turning into a lie. The washer is there, a silent safety margin, but he does not treat it like armor. He treats it like what it is. A little more time to choose. Mini payoff. The Merlin does not stumble. The Spitfire stays in the fight through the first set of feints. The enemy does not get the easy separation he wanted. Switch, point of view. In the German cockpit, the pilot feels the change. The old game is gone. He cannot simply push and vanish. The British pilot is staying with him, disciplined, steady. The German pilot has to spend more energy now to create space, and spending energy means spending options. He tries again, forcing a sharper transition, hoping to coax the Spitfire into that tiny unload. The British pilot feels his inner ear start to whisper because the maneuver is designed to confuse. He feels the temptation to correct by easing the stick forward. This is where the washer's story becomes something else. Not just a part, but a moment in the evolution of tactics. The British learned to resist the trap. The Germans learned to disguise the trap. The air war becomes a chess game played at 400 miles an hour. A single technical detail matters here, but only once. The restrictor reduces flooding in brief negative G events, but under sustained or repeated unloading, the carburetor can still misbehave. That means the washer gives you forgiveness for a mistake, not permission to repeat the mistake. Clock. The pilot can afford one small error. He cannot afford a pattern. He clamps down on his habit. Roll, pull, keep it loaded. He stays in positive G through the confusion. The German pilot finally breaks, not by diving straight away, but by turning toward cloud, using the sun and vapor as cover. He slips out with skill, not with a cheap physics exploit. Mini payoff. And that is the flip. The escape is no longer free. It costs the enemy thought. It costs him risk. It costs him the chance of being caught. Back at base, the pilot sits on the wing root during debrief, helmet on his knee, eyes unfocused as he replays the fight. He realizes something that would have sounded unbelievable 6 months earlier. He did not once think about whether the engine would cut out. Not because the risk is gone, but because the risk is managed now. The washer, the training, the habit, they have turned panic into procedure. Stakes. That changes everything. Because a pilot who is not terrified of his own engine can spend his fear on the enemy instead. Switch. Point of view. In a maintenance hut, a ground crewman wipes down the same small part, checks the seating, checks the condition. He does not call it heroic. He just keeps doing it because heroes in this story are often men with rags and wrenches. He looks up at the sky and hears aircraft in the distance. He knows those aircraft carry the washer or newer systems or some mix of fixes that keep the Merlin breathing through impossible moments. Clock war keeps counting. The next innovation is always on the horizon, but the next fight is always closer. The rule against this threat is simple. The moment you stop respecting the small detail is the moment it stops saving you. The cliffhanger for the final section is waiting in the quiet after the sortie. Everyone can tell the washer mattered. The question is how to explain that without turning it into a myth, and what lesson the smallest detail is really trying to teach. 1941. Somewhere in England, in the quiet after the urgent months. The airfield has the same mud, the same wind, the same smell of fuel clinging to canvas and wool. But the panic that once lived in every scramble has thinned. Not gone, never gone, just managed. Like a fire that used to leap and now smolders under watch. A Spitfire sits with its cowlings open, and inside that familiar maze of pipes and metal, there is still room for small things. A washer, a restrictor, a part that looks like nothing until the second it becomes the only thing between a pilot and gravity. A pilot stands nearby, not young anymore, not in the way he was in 1940. He watches a mechanic's hands moving with careful speed. The mechanic does not talk much. The work speaks. Clock. The next alarm could still come today. And if it does, the pilot will have minutes to get airborne and seconds to make the right decisions once the sky turns hostile. Stakes. If the engine falters at the wrong moment, everything collapses. Altitude, speed control, and the thin thread that leads back to home. The rule against this threat is simple. You do not wait for perfect safety. You build small protections, and you respect them, because they are what keep you alive long enough to see tomorrow. Switch. Point of view. In an office, a stack of reports sits in a tray. Some of them mention new systems, improved delivery, better solutions that no longer fear negative G the way the early Merlins did. But tucked among them is a quieter paper trail, the stopgap, the washer, the restrictor that bridged the gap when bridging the gap was the only option. It would be easy years later to turn this into a clean story. A single genius moment, a single invention, a single person. War stories love simplicity, but the truth is messier and the truth is sharper. It was not just the washer. It was the washer plus training, the washer plus ground crew, the washer plus discipline, the washer plus a pilot's refusal to panic into weightlessness. Mini payoff. Together, those pieces turned the enemy's nose down, escape from a reliable exit into a contested gamble. They stole back seconds. They stole back options. They made the fight less one-sided in that one specific deadly moment. Records differ on how widely the restrictor was installed at any exact date, but the outcome is consistent. It reduced the negative G cutouts that had been giving the enemy a predictable escape, and it bought time until more robust carburation and fuel delivery solutions arrived. Clock, and that is the core clock of this whole story. Not a stopwatch in a cockpit, but a race between failure and improvement. Between men running out of seconds and engineers trying to give them more. Stakes lose that race, and you do not just lose machines. You lose the people inside them. The rule against this threat is simple. In war, the smallest gap becomes the deadliest opening. Your job is to close it, even if all you have is a washer. Switch, point of view. Tilly Shilling stands at a bench, a lamp throwing a tight circle of light on metal. She is not thinking about legends. She is thinking about the next problem. That is how engineers survive war. By treating today's miracle as tomorrow's baseline. She picks up the small ring and turns it between finger and thumb. It feels ordinary. That is the point. The part is not supposed to be romantic. It is supposed to work. Somewhere else, a pilot climbs into his aircraft and straps in. He does not know Tilly personally. He may never speak her name. But when he pushes into a dive and the engine does not die, he is living in her work. Stakes. That is the quiet violence of engineering. It changes who gets to breathe again without ever firing a shot. Lesson for the audience. The small detail in this story is almost insulting in its simplicity. A 2-inch washer, a restrictor, a controlled opening that told fuel to behave for just a few seconds. But those few seconds were the whole fight. They were the difference between a pilot obeying the rule and surviving the dive, or being punished for one instinctive motion. In your own life, it's rarely the grand plan that saves you in the moment. It's the tiny safeguard you installed earlier, the habit, the checklist, the extra step you thought was overkill, until it isn't. That's soldiers' lost voices, where the smallest details still carry the loudest echoes. Here on Soldiers' Lost Voices, we chase the small details that change the whole outcome. If one detail in this story stuck with you, tell me what it was in the comments and why. And if you have a question about the moment that turned everything, or a story you want us to dig into next, drop it below.